very good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good speech.
When you speak after Chairman Xi, then whatever numbers you speak about sound a little midgeted because the numbers in China suddenly get expanded by many times. So, but I'm absolutely certain that between India and China, we have the potential to shape many technologies and industries in times to come. And the collective size of the ecosystem in these two countries can actually change the tide and business case for many future applications and technologies. LTE just happens to be one of those. I've been in this industry for 14, 15 years, and I must say that this is probably the most intense period that I've seen, and intensity really gets drawn from the success and potential of this industry. Because of the success of this industry, the intensity amongst all stakeholders, no matter which part of the world, has increased significantly over the last few years. Everybody is debating not about today, but about tomorrow. The biggest change has come from governments, licensors, regulators, who are all putting their heads together to say, how do they make their countries competitive for future? Where do they get the next 500 megahertz of spectrum to be globally competitive? And the debate has shifted from sheer physical assets and infrastructure to virtual assets and infrastructure. And that's a significant change that has happened, which all of us are witnessing, and I'm sure this will yield good results as we progress. What I'm trying to do in my presentation is probably bring in a little different perspective on how we see challenges and probably give a little more perspective about the developing world. The voice story, I'm sure each one of you is pretty well versed with, and I think voice has been a great story not only in the developing part of the world, but in the developed part of the world as well. I mean, today in even countries like India, we have a 70% penetration on voice. We are virtually available in every nook and corner of the country. We've been able to change lives of many across the country on what they do with their mobile and how they get connected. And especially when the physical infrastructure is still desirable, I think this is one area where we've contributed positively to the lives of millions of people all across the country. And in the last 3 years, the volumes have grown some 4 times, and the revenues have become 18 times in the last 7 years, and that's the sort of quantum growth that has happened. And the graph has been moving up. And when you look at this exponential growth, wireless has played probably a very significant role in this, because in our part of the world, the fiber does not connect many homes and offices, and therefore it's wireless, which is the solution to connect many millions of people all across. However, while this exponential growth is on, we've seen a great trajectory on the revenues, but the graph seems to be tapering down a bit in the last couple of years. Yes, of course, a bit has to do with the hyper competition in the country and losing price by about 25% in the last 8-10 quarters. But despite of that, the ARPUs have been falling in this industry consistently, the voice ARPUs, and therefore a little bit of blip on the voice side. However, despite of that, I think where mobile telephony has reached is far, far beyond anything else around it. Whether it's television sets or computers or ATMs, we've gone far, far beyond that. And actually, the number of voice customers all across the country are not only diversified, but more than 900 million. And it'll cross a billion mark very shortly. What I told earlier was very clearly that when you look at the average revenue graph, the usage per customer might have gone up, but because of the price corrections and intense competition, you see the ARPUs have been falling at a breakneck speed. And 3 things have made it really go down. One is commoditization of voice. The second is hyper competition. We compete amongst 14 of us in a marketplace. The market doesn't get busier than that. And it's a multi-SIM scenario where a lot of people, because of the price arbitrage, actually carry multiple SIMs on them, and also probably multiple SIMs for various applications, one for BlackBerry, probably one for an iPhone, one for some other application. Although machine to machine is still a very small bit, but I think multi-SIM scenario is primarily driven by the voice arbitrage, the price arbitrage that sits in the market. Well, if this is the scenario, then what are going to be the key drivers for growth? And I'm not necessarily going to get into technology bits here. I think the biggest opportunity in the parts of the world that we live in is actually the youth population. 50% of the population in my country is below the age group of 26 years. There are 400 million people who are below the age group of 14 years. Now, these are the consumers who live a very different life compared to probably some of us. They believe in always connected. They have no problem in dealing with multiple devices. They believe in instant gratification. Their libraries are Wikipedias and not national libraries that we were used to. And these are not the sort of folks who believe in saving for future. They're all people who like to spend their disposable income now and here. And when you look at this population, they are the game changers, especially in the developing part of the world, where this large population has the capability of actually bridging the digital divide between the developed world and the developing world. And that's a great opportunity that sits in this part of the world through youth population, which actually can be a game changer, moving this industry and business from being a voice-dominated business to a business that actually enables lifestyle changes and lifestyle enhancement amongst millions of people scattered all across the country. The next change that can really drive, or the next catalyst that can drive a great change in future, is actually the gap on introduction of technologies in the developed part of the world and developing part of the world has undergone a significant change. We were significantly behind the developed part of the world when it came to 2G technologies. We were still chasing the world when it came to 3G technologies. But the moment you begin to talk about technologies like LTE, TDD, we are timing the world. We are absolutely launching these services in line with the rest of the world. And I'm sure same will happen on NFC, cloud computing, and many other services where we are as contemporary as the rest of the world. And this actually enables the speed of change much faster. It makes even more sense because the country is not wired, and therefore wireless technologies become even more acceptable and relevant, especially in an environment where speed is the killer app. The third change, or the third opportunity which sits on the table, is all around so many other things which are really underpenetrated. When you look at the rural internet, it's less than 1% penetrated. When you look at broadband penetration, it's less than 1% penetrated. You look at smartphones, they are the fastest growing segment, growing at over 100% year on year. However, the base is so small that it's below 3%. And even if it grows at 100% over the next couple of years, it'll be still below 10% in terms of penetration. And urban internet penetration, which should be a lot higher, is still less than 6%. All these things just suggest that even if the migration towards the new world of ICT would drastically go wrong, you will still be right. Because the opportunity is so ripe, the opportunity is so much, that no matter which direction you head towards, you'll still go northwards. And that's a great opportunity that sits in the part of the world that we operate in. Let me spend some time and talk about what are the opportunities that actually come by way of periphery industries, and some of my colleagues have spoken about this before. Very clearly, when Apple introduced iPhone and changed the lives of people all across the globe, it's not only Apple that went through transformation, but many other industries went through a great deal of transformation. The automotive industry had to redesign its automobiles to make sure that music can be heard and contraptions that can accommodate Apple products can be made available on their automobiles if they want to be competitive. Apparel companies, Nike, for example, had to redesign its own apparel range to make sure you could listen to music while you're jogging, while you're swimming, while you're underwater, so many other things. And actually these industries went through a huge amount of transformation. I think the potential that we carry in our industry has a similar potential of reshaping many other periphery industries that sit all around us. Look at banking, for example, in a country like India. Less than 50% of the people have a bank account. 50% of the prepaid customers on Airtel network do not have a bank account. When you look at the cash spent in the country, over $500 billion of cash gets spent in the country. When you look at 22 million Indians who reside all over the world, they actually send about $38 billion of money earned overseas into the country every year. And it comes through various forms, various sizes. When you look at people working in different parts of the country, and every fifth person in the country actually works somewhere outside his domicile, and he transfers money back home, it really comes through a snail mail mechanism, and probably some events are well surpassed before the money even reaches the people who are needy. Similarly, when you look at health, there's a big void which is there. The health standards in the developing part of the world are still much lesser than the developed part. Whether you look at nurses per thousand, whether you look at doctors per thousand, whether you look at beds per thousand, there is so much to be done. And here is an industry which can actually become the highway of connecting all these services and actually bringing these services down to the lowest common denominator anywhere in the part of the world that we service. Similar is the stuff when it comes to education, with number of educational institutions available, and the fact that in a country like India, we still have 100,000 schools which have only one teacher, and no more than that. And therefore, you can really bring in a lot of respite to such like industries by actually connecting all these through a jigsaw which can make sense, which can be affordable, which can be pervasive, and therefore enrich lives of millions of people all across. This is the potential of the industry that we've put together. Technology is just an enabler. It is the mindset that needs to undergo a change to make this happen. And I think all of us are working in that direction. Today, we are putting together banking services, health services, commerce and internet, education, all across. They are obviously in different stages of development, but there are results that we are seeing at a much faster pace than we ever saw earlier. What is the new business model? And I think this is important, and here's probably where I'm not getting too technical, but getting a little more pragmatic as a CEO to say what changes in my life with the change which is happening. Very clearly, what we are seeing now is new partnerships. Absolutely new partnerships emerging, because now we are dealing with banks, we are dealing with pharmaceutical and health companies, we are dealing with educational institutes and government, and therefore it changes the whole ecosystem that we have to deal with compared to the one that we were used to earlier. Obviously, there's resistance. Every time there's a change, there's resistance. So you had banks who were very worried, are we going to come and eat their lunch and dinner? And they were probably, impediments earlier. But I think they've all recognized that it is not possible to serve so many people with so little of infrastructure that they've set up. And we can probably bring in the scale, affordability, and transactional capability at a fraction of a cost compared to any one of them, and therefore it makes sense. Same is the case when it comes to health agencies, and we work with Religare, we work with others to make it possible. Advertising, who in the advertising field understands advertising on the internet? It's probably only the Googles and Yahoos and Facebooks who probably understand that, not the traditional advertising agencies. They're undergoing a change. We are putting a new ecosystem together where we are working with many of them. And there are some new shops that are emerging that had never probably worked in this direction earlier. There are people who've moved away from probably some of these internet companies to look at these fine startups that can bring a lot of value to our industry. And we work with one of these called Moge in India. And there's many more of these collaborations that are happening. But I think the most significant change that we have to recognize is within our own organizations. And the most significant change for us is that voice was all about linear thinking and linear approach, and the data and lifestyle enrichment is all non-linear. How do you make your organizations multidimensional in their thinking, in their approach, and how do you actually bring about that change in your organizations is probably a big capability development that every CEO, every senior leader in organization has to think through. Up to now, the biggest challenge, at least in the developing part of the world for us, was to scale up. Nobody had a customer base of 100 million customers other than a couple of operators in China. And therefore, how do you make it happen? There weren't technologies available that you could pick up, copy, paste, and make it happen. Therefore, there was a lot of hit and trial that happened. But if there was a challenge, the challenge was about scaling up. And what was very relevant was experience. What experience do you carry? Do you have the relevant experience? And if you have the relevant experience, come and work for us. We'll give you this job because you carry so-and-so experience. How's the world changing now? If, first of all, I think experience is passé. What has come on what is in vogue is truly relevance. Are you relevant or are you not relevant? And this is where I think Eric Schmidt's statement or a quote makes a lot of sense. He says, if you want to understand the future, then either hire, borrow, or manufacture a teenager, and you'll understand the future. And that's true, because what is important is what is relevant. And I think we need to move from experience to relevance if we want to stay competitive in this field and deliver. The second thing that is changing for us is we are moving from managing scale to managing complexity. Can you imagine the maze that you create in an organization which has professionals from financial services, professionals from health services, professionals from education services, advertising services, all sitting under a same roof and trying to run a business which was erstwhile a telecom business. Their expectations are different, their aspirations are different, and the triggers in their lives are different. How do you manage this complexity? I don't think there is any industry across the globe that has done it earlier. And this will be a big challenge in the transformation that my colleagues have spoken about earlier. The other one, and Chairman Xi spoke about this as well, was from moving from a product-centric environment to a customer-centric environment. Voice was very simple to deal with. You know, when there's a dropped call, when there's a disturbed call, then you know what elements of the network could have gone wrong. But when you are on an internet session trying to access some content lying in an unknown part of the world, you don't know what element of the network went wrong, and the customer doesn't care. You end up making sure that you have a billing system which has got the capability of charging per gigabyte, per megabyte, but the customer only understands that he's downloaded a picture or a video or a song, and how the hell does he correlate the two together? And therefore, the whole thinking of the organizations have to move towards a customer-centric environment, because ultimately technologies will be available to everybody. The only differentiator between operators will be how you manage the customer experience differently from others who compete in the same space. Finally, the concept which is probably well spoken about today, to say, are we going to be competing with over-the-top players and other stakeholders, or are we collaborating with them? I think the answer lies somewhere in between. It's going to be a play of frenemies, friends and enemies, where you will befriend them wherever required, and you'll fiercely compete with them wherever it's required. Ultimately, the canvas will have enough room for all of us to be happy, because the industry and the opportunity is large enough.